Ah, man, what a great trip to IKEA. This new Jaskussen is so soft and cozy.
Oh, I don't know. I feel like we should have gone bigger. The Bullsmutton was not quite as comfy, but it was just a little bit bigger, and we have the space for it in this room.
Oh, man, it's fine. We saved a bit of money, and it's more than enough room. Come on, hop in.
All right. Okay. Well, can you move over a tad?
There's no more room.
Well, if we bought the Bootsmartsen, we would have had enough space for us and our partners. The world of Walt and James being romantically living together, but also now confirmed that we're actually like part of a big open relationship, I guess.
It's us, our partners, IKEA, everyone's invited.
And
basically.
all the listeners.
Yeah.
We probably should have got the Bootsmartsen because then all of our listeners could have fit in there.
Awful. Welcome to the Get Commanded podcast by the Greensboro Commander community. It's the GCP by the GCC and POG, Palms Off Gaming, sponsor of this podcast. We're all uniting forces to help you to have better games of Commander. I'm your host, Walt.
And hello, Commander players. I'm your other host, James. Now, I can see the blinking green light, and I do see a CC on this email. This is another one of these special Patreon request episodes.
Right, one of our new Space Commanders, Overlords. Okay.
Which is terrifying because they're growing in
it's
numbers.
True.
But if you are interested in requesting episodes like today's topic, you can actually support the podcast and get that amazing privilege to do so in the Space Commander tier. You can find all of the amazing tiers and all the rewards on patreon.com/getcommanderpodcast.
Yep, have a look if you want to scare the crap out of me and James.
Or abduct us. Actually, no, please don't do that. Please
just
don't do that.
Scare us, I guess.
Yeah?
Look, the green light's blinking.
Do the thing.
We have an incoming transmission from the deep depths of the galaxy, from the Space Commanders. It's time to get commanded.
You have discussed the mechanical aspects of building a commander deck, illustrating blueprints to ensure functional gameplay. Why is this required? A member of our cohort requires that you explore some alternatives to your template as an approach to deck building.
Interesting. It's kind of, I'm assuming that the Space Commanders want us to like highlight why we have a template in the first place, because they're aliens. They don't get that we need guidelines on how to do things. I imagine do you reckon they're robots? Are they programmed to do stuff?
I have no idea what they are. But
terrifying.
They clearly, so they like, they're not saying get rid of your template. Like, they're fine with the template as it is, but they're saying, why do you have it? And is there some alternatives to having your template?
So I can see that.
That makes sense. Okay, so I guess we should start with, in case people are not aware, we have outlined our deck building template that we use whenever we build a commander deck. I think it was episode 37 that we did that in.
And there's a bunch of like big ones where we go into a detail way back in episode like 14.
Yeah, 14, 15, 16 I think it was. A while ago now. Things have changed slightly since then, but not very much. So if you want to go do a deep dive, that's the place to go. But basically, pretty like all those Magic content creators out there, we have our template that we recommend when people are building decks. When people ask for deck advice, we often point them to this as the first place to start.
I've actually run a deck building workshop based on this template at our local game store. So
I wasn't able to make it to that one, but I heard it was like received really well.
No, it was great, and there was a lot of new players that really like has since then have like posted decks on our Discord being like, hey, look, I've built this deck and I've looked across it and it looks very functional. So it works is what we're saying. But should we remind everyone like what each of the numbers are just to quickly breeze through it?
Let's do it, definitely. So the most important one arguably in your deck is going to be card draw.
Every deck needs it.
Every deck needs it. We recommend 10 plus. I think in our most recent recommendations we were saying even around that 15 mark can be sweet. I know that's often what I'm aiming for when I'm building decks these days.
Minimum 10.
Yeah, I'd say so.
And then ramp is a similar situation where you're also at like minimum 10. If your deck requires big mana stuff, then probably put in more, but it's minimum 10 to have a functional pod happening. You know, you want to be ramping on turns 2, 3, that kind of stuff.
Yep, that one's the one we've also been a little bit more flexible with these days, where we did the whole mana curvy episode where we explored the idea of playing no ramp at all.
Yep.
So check that one out if you want to explore that as an idea, but most of the time 10 ramp is going to be where you want to be. The next one's targeted removal. So these are just spells that say destroy target creature, destroy target artifact, enchantment, that kind of thing. We recommend at least 7 of those. And again, you can go a little higher, around 8 or 9 or 10 is totally reasonable too.
And then like mass removal, which is like board wipe. So this is any card that says destroy all or exile all.
Yep.
We're recommending around 2 to 3, but obviously 2 to 3 is like your average. Some decks won't want any. Some decks will want maybe 5.
Yeah.
So it's 2 to 3 is like what we're considering an average in a deck.
Yep. The other two categories we have here, this is where we start to move a little bit away from what other people are recommending, because these categories you won't always hear other people discuss.
The Get Commanded special sauce.
Yeah,
it's
the
like
special sauce.
11 herbs and spices for your deck building from James and Walt.
It's true. So one of them is win conditions. So we recommend having about 4 spells that basically, if you have the right board state, just say you win the game. So if you're going on a go wide, make lots of tokens kind of strategy, this is a card like Overrun or Overwhelming Stampede. It makes all your creatures really big, gives them trample, that's going to let you finish that game.
Yeah, and then enhancers are similar to win cons in that they like fuel you that end of the game thing, but can take your board state from not quite a winning position to get you to a winning position so your win con cards properly close out the game. So the card we use very frequently in this example is a card like Panharmonicon.
Yep.
This is a card that doubles enter the battlefield effects. So on its own, does absolutely nothing, but with a deck that has lots of enter the battlefield effects, it's like, I've referred to it as the nitrous oxide in a fuel tank.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is the thing that's going to, like, around the middle of the game, it's going to shoot you ahead if you have them. But yeah, it's not a win con because it's not finishing the game necessarily.
100%.
The other category we have here that, again, is not one you hear all the time is protection spells. So these are spells that just protect your game plan. In some decks, these might be counter spells because they're just going to stop people from removing your stuff. In a lot of my decks, they're going to be cards like Blacksmith's Skill or Sejuri Refuge that give protection from a color or give something indestructible or hexproof, just to prevent people from blowing up your really key pieces, like those win cons and enhancers.
Yeah, and we recommend about 5 of these, but you can also think of cards like Ghostly Prison, for example, a bit of a protection spell because...
Protect your life total.
Protects your life total, yeah.
Yep.
And then the final category is the all-important, how many lands should I run in my deck, Walt?
Yes. Between 35 and 42 is what we recommend.
Yes.
It's quite a wide category there because it really depends on how high your curve is, how many colors you're playing, and also, like we explored in that mana curvy episode, the less ramp you have, generally speaking, the more important it's going to be for you to hit your land drops, and you can't hit land drops unless you're finding them from the top of your library.
Exactly,
so you're going to need more of them around that 42 mark.
But like, play it safe if you're new to deck building, 37.
Yeah.
There you go. Just slap bang in the middle, say 37 and you should be fine.
And that's the good thing about this template as well, is that if you're not sure whether you should go higher on any of these, your deck will be probably fine if you just have that minimum amount. If you build a deck and you have 10 bits of card draw, 10 bits of ramp, 2 to 3 board wipes, 5 protection spells, your deck will mostly just work.
It should just function. And the reason why that you see this so commonly, because like Command Zone, Tolarian Community College, like every YouTuber
Nitpicking Nerds have their own one,
like even Jumbo Command, like all of these incredible content creators have done a video, a podcast episode, or something similar on how to build a commander deck using a template very similar to what we've just outlined.
Yeah.
And they'll pretty much always highlight the big 4 categories, which is card draw, ramp, removal, and lands.
Yeah.
You will always hear those 4 big categories. And then the difference between each content creator is like, for example, Walt and I really like putting emphasis on enhancers and protection and explaining how those work. But some other content creators will really focus in on removal or something like that. It's this special little sauce you get from listening to multiple different people's takes on building a deck.
Definitely. I've noticed that Nitpicking Nerds in Command Zone are definitely super high on card draw and removal, for instance. They're a bit higher on those than we are. And I think it's because both of those groups of people tend to play in slightly more higher powered pods, probably,
I'd say that.
than me and James. So that removal removal especially becomes essential, basically, in those pods.
Now, the last thing in a lot of these deck building templates is often referred to as like synergy. I know, like, I recently watched, I was sending some friends like videos on how to build a commander deck.
Yeah.
And of course I sent them our podcast. But I was looking at like Tolarian Community College, and the professor like talks about the big four and then has another category called synergy.
Yeah.
And this is like what your deck does. Like, for example, if you're in +1 counters, these are cards that put +1 counters or care about +1 counters.
Sure. I know when we talk about this, it's kind of silly and not really helpful, but we often call it the thing.
Yeah, well,
you know, like your deck has to do the thing. If you're building a wizard's deck, which I've done, you will need at least about 25 is our recommendation. Cards that are the thing. So if you're building a wizard's deck, my deck has 25 wizards in it. It might be closer to 30, but you need at least 25 because your deck is built around having access to a particular card type. You know, in an artifact deck, you'd be very silly to include less than 25 artifacts, right? You got to find them. You got to play them.
Could not agree more. Like, I've got like my X like spells deck, or my big X spells deck, and I have pretty much every spell in there is the thing, which is an X spell because my commander cares about casting X spells. So when we talk about synergy, or when we say the word synergy, we look at it a little bit differently than just being the thing that your deck does, because we look at it as like, your deck has needs, and like the needs of card draw and removal and all that kind of stuff. But the synergy is where a card can do multiple things. And this is why we love Moxfield. Hashtag not sponsored, but please sponsor us. Because you can tag a card in Moxfield as removal and also the thing. So a card that I'm going to use for an example here, let's say we're in a go wide strategy. Artifact Mutation. Fantastic card if you're in red-green.
This is the one for red and green. It's an instant. It destroys an artifact, and then you make X saprolings, like 1/1 saprolings, where X is the mana value of the artifact you destroyed, I believe. Right?
Yeah, exactly right. So if you're in a go-wide strategy, this card is just amazing, because it's a removal spell, but it's also making us tokens.
Yeah, when we put this custom tags in Moxfield on Artifact Mutation, it's going to appear in both of those big columns that it separates the deck into, right? Yep. When we look at removal, Artifact Mutation will be in there. When we look at Go Wide, the thing makes tokens, something like that, it's going to be in there as well.
And like, you know, we also extend the thing to cards that just do the thing. So for example, like making tokens, if that's our thing, you kept casting Sprout Swarm about 1 million times last night. That's one of your favorite cards.
Yeah, like it's just a great way to turn an already existing pretty good board of tokens into a lot more of them.
Just every turn, just pump out one more Saproling.
It might be my favorite Magic card.
I would say that it's pretty amazing. But like, you could also look at cards like, you know, March of the Multitudes, a new card from, I believe, March of the Machine Commander decks, I believe, because it's got Convoke.
Yeah.
It's kind of insane. I just had a look on EDH Rec for token makers, and this was like one of the highest synergy cards at the moment. It's also really cheap, but I think it's bonkers. It makes 1/1s with lifelink.
And it has Convoke, right? Yeah. And it's also an instant, I noticed, which is really cool.
On end step, just slam a board full of 1/1s.
Yeah, this is definitely one that could turn your like already good board into probably a game-winning board if you have enough of it. Yeah.
But I guess that the next thing to like think about of like what the thing is, because like the strategy of your deck, the thing, it could be considered your archetype. And archetypes are something you can find on EDH Rec. You can go through all that. But like, if you want, we actually run a series. It's not voluntary. We get abducted, but we actually do deck breakdowns of different archetypes.
We do.
You can go back and listen to, we've done lands, we've done
aristocrats, we've also just recently done Spellslinger. Yep. So yeah, if you're specifically building a deck of a particular type, we've built, the archetype. But yeah, in those episodes we discuss, like, I think the top of our deck archetypes aristocrats episode is how many aristocrats should you run?
Yes.
Because it's kind of an exception to the usual rule of running as many as you can. Because we sort of go into the fact that actually in that kind of a deck, the thing is having lots of creatures to sacrifice.
Yes, and the aristocrat is the thing that pays you off, which could be maybe considered an enhancer in that deck,
something like that.
But yeah, I guess it's probably, like, now we've outlined what the template is and what all the different words mean, I think it's really important for us to say why we actually have a template in the first place.
Well, the Space Commanders asked us straight up, right? They said, like, why do you have it? So I guess we should explain before we move into that second part of the command, which was about like alternatives
and like ways we can approach the deck building process, not with the template front of mind.
So let's make an argument to the Space Commanders. Why do we love our template so much, James?
Well, look, to be perfectly honest, the template of a commander deck in any Magic the Gathering deck is just statistical math.
Yeah.
And as someone that studied statistical math at university, I actually love this stuff.
Yep.
But when you look at a template, it's basically outlining the key criteria to meet to ensure that the ratios of lands to spells is correct. So you could go in and if you didn't know what a template for Commander deck building was, you could go in and be like, right, I need to think about drawing one card a turn, but hitting a land drop every turn. So my average opening hand should have maybe 3 lands in it, so I can play a land, draw a spell, play a land, draw a spell, play a land, draw another land for next turn. So then I need a ratio of 1 to 3.4-ish lands to spells ratio, so it should run approximately 37. That's like a lot of math to do in your head, and then that's just on lands. Then you have to think about like how many card draw spells you need, how much card draw is that card draw spell giving you.
Yeah.
It's so much easier just to go to a content creator and go, 37 lands.
Yeah.
Cool, I'll follow that.
Well, I can say, like, definitively, at least from our perspective as content creators, our template is based on just building a load of decks and noticing what works and what doesn't. So,
trial and error.
like, we've talked before about how some of my first Commander decks, I misheard the command zone and thought you only needed 5 pieces of card draw and 5 bits of, ramp in your decks, and consequently I never friggin' drew enough cards or had enough mana because I wasn't playing enough of the thing. So like,
shocker.
Yeah, I mean, if you're an experienced player, you'll hear people go like, oh, I tried to build this deck without ramp. Sam Black is a professional Magic player, and he straight up is like, yeah, most of my decks I play 42 lands and no ramp spells in them because I don't feel the need for them. So like, but it's based on this maths and a lot of experience of drawing cards off the top and going like, when I have 33 lands in my deck, I never seem to hit my 4th land drop ever.
Yeah, well, I mean, it goes even further than that. I think when I was like really new and building my Scarab God deck, which still exists, but at the time when I was building it, well, when I was tinkering with it, I was like, I can take out a land here, and I didn't understand the consequence of removing a basic land every time I wanted to put a new card in the deck.
Yep.
And I ended up with like 28 to 32 lands at one point.
Yeah.
Which is not enough, and I never had enough the mana.
Of them. You were always like, oh man, I'd love to activate Scarab God right here and steal something out of someone's graveyard. Wish I had some lands for that.
My 2 lands, Sol Ring and Arcane Signet's doing me a great job on turn 12.
I love lands.
Yeah, but
hope to draw some someday.
The whole point is to like ensure that doesn't happen. To use this template is to ensure that basically if you use it, it's really hard to go wrong. And it's probably good to note as well that mana curve is not inherently in the template, but is super important to deck building.
Yeah.
We have a whole episode on mana curve, which you've already mentioned. You can go check that out. But the mana curve is not inherently in the template, but you could basically just say if you average out 2 to 3 mana across your deck, if that's your average mana value in your deck, that should probably work.
Yeah, I think we also found that most of our decks were averaging like 3.4, 3.5, and some of our like super casual decks might have been a bit higher, like 3.6, and they're also fine.
Yeah. My Gishath deck was like 4.8 or something.
There's always going to be exceptions to the rule, as we outlined in that episode, but yeah, most decks should fall somewhere between 3 and 4 maybe if they're casual decks, and that will be like totally fine for you.
All right, so once we've understood the template, which we have done now, we said we use like the karate metaphor of kung fu metaphor. Kung fu.
Everyone's always like, he did karate, and it's like, no, it wasn't karate. Yes, kung fu.
Different thing. I apologize.
Yeah, it's okay. I forgive you.
Kick my ass all over the floor. But once we've mastered the rules, we can now break them because we now understand why it's there and the importance of it. Yeah. So I guess now we're kind of looking at the alternatives to using the template, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think that once you've got a template, once you understand the template, you know that the template is there for the needs, and the needs of the deck don't change. Like, if you have a commander deck that you have a template for and cards are labeled card draw, removal, ramp, protection, and then you go to build a new one, you still need card draw. You still need removal in a commander deck.
Yeah,
but your approach could be very different.
Yeah, I see what you mean. So, like, the deck was always going to need some amount of those things in there, but I guess if you've mastered the template, that knowledge might just sit in the back of your mind to the extent that you don't have to be thinking, okay, I'm sitting down to build a deck. Okay, I must have 10 bits of card draw, right? You could sit down and go like, I'm going to build a deck like specifically with this mindset and assume that my knowledge and experience will let me fill in the rest, right?
Yeah.
Like I'll end up with enough card draw because I'll probably just gravitate towards it anyway.
Well, when I ran that deck building workshop at the local game store, we actually had the printout of like our templates. And we had like a PowerPoint slide thing. It was very academic.
You showed it to me. It looked really nice, actually.
Oh, thank you. It took me a while to put that together. It got like very nice artwork on it and used our sprites.
We could share that around somewhere. People could use
Yeah,
that.
100%.
Maybe we'll link that in the show notes or something this episode.
Yeah, for context, the if we do link it in the show notes, the PowerPoint that we'll link is a PowerPoint that's based around the Lord of the Rings set, because we ran it in conjunction with the release of Lord of the Rings at the local game store.
Yeah.
So, and lots of people wanted to build it. There was a lot of new players because Lord of the Rings attracted a lot of new players.
Yeah.
So, yeah, the cards as examples are all Lord of the Rings, so enjoy that. But yes, I think that the template is like really easily followable, and we handed out those like PowerPoint slides. But I really hope that after building 3 or 4 or 5 commander decks, you're not still pulling out that template, that block. I feel like once you understand it, you should be fine. So you can take a completely different approach to deck building.
Yeah.
I actually think deck building challenges are super like common in experienced deck builders.
Definitely.
I think that people sometimes put restrictions on themselves, which, you know, force you to think about filling the requirements, but in a completely different way.
Yeah, I mean, I had to set myself the restriction semi-recently. I haven't actually built this deck in paper, but I built it on Knoxfield. I wanted to build a deck with 50 creatures in it.
Oh, I've seen
this. I think I initially aimed to have only creatures and lands in the deck, and then I was like, this seems a bit unrealistic. So
this is your Ruric Thar deck, right?
Yeah, so I built a Ruric Thar, the Unbowed deck, so he's the 6-mana Gruul commander, so it's like 4 red-green. I think he's like a 4/6 with Vigilance and Reach or something.
Big boy.
But importantly, he says, whenever a player casts a non-creature spell, Ruric Thar deals 6 damage to them.
It's kind of nuts.
It's absolutely bananas crazy. So basically, you want to build your deck so that you have like pretty much no non-creature spells in there, right? You just want to do everything with creatures so you never get domed and just keep Ruric Thar in the battlefield so that everyone else gets domed all the time.
Yep. How did you go about like when in the mindset of like, you know, you use the template because you created it with me, and it's like it's so in your mind. When you were building that deck, were you thinking 10 card draw, 10 ramp, or was your approach different?
What I did, so I often will start with the EDH rec page of a commander, add a bunch of things there, and then I'll look at some decks I've already built and chuck a few cards across that I think could carry across from existing decks. And then I do some Scryfall searches and find some others. And the thing that I always end up with is about like 180 cards. And then I start cutting them. So when I have a deck building restriction like this one...
I thought you were about to say, and then I build 2 decks.
That would be a lot less painful.
Yeah.
No, so then it's more of a, for me, it's more of a thing of going, okay, now that I know the cards that I'm considering and I know the focus, I know which cards to cut. So when I was building the Ruric Thar deck, my first place to look for cards to cut was non-creature spells. So I cut the vast majority of them until the ones that were still in the deck were the ones that I felt were essential, right?
Yeah.
Like every
Needed to be in.
Yeah, every single other part of the deck was fulfilled by the creatures that were in there. So I did tag them all. Like I had the tags there. I was aware of where the numbers were going when I was cutting cards. But I was mostly looking at, the theme. I was mostly going like, okay, non-creature spells have got to go. And then my thing that I tend to do immediately after that is like this card's $3. Too much. Cut it.
So budget is another incredible
Budget's a big
influence
one.
factor.
Yeah. But yeah, I would say I was aware of the template, but because I knew my focus going in, I knew where I was going within the template, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I guess like when you're like choosing cards, especially in, you know, considering you were in Gruul, my thought was like, if you see mana dorks, you're immediately putting those in because in your head you're like, hey, that fills my role of ramp, but it's also a creature, which is the whole point of this deck.
Oh yeah.
So it just it's a natural fit.
Yeah, and it's exactly the same way. Any creature that said draw cards on it, I was like, that's the one that's going in.
Yeah.
Right? Like Beast Whisperer is like an
so
auto
good.
include, but even there's like a 6 mana that has the same text as, I think it's called something Primordial or Primordial Sage. It's Primordial Sage. 6 mana creature that says exactly the same text as Beast Whisperer. So it's a way less efficient version of the effect, but when you want everything to be on a creature, it's totally like workable.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I guess deck building restrictions from what I gather, because I've built like a couple of decks with restrictions. Like I've built decks where I've had to only use my collection, like not using any singles and stuff like that.
I like these things when you do them. It's really cool to see you chuck in cards that like it feels very, ironically, it feels very tinkery. Like we talked before about tinkering before, and I tinker by buying a shitload of cards and then like just swapping them out a lot. But I feel like you tinker a lot by being like, this card's interesting, I'm gonna try it.
Well,
you know?
just recently this is jumping formats now, but we recently noticed that Crash of Rhino Beetles had been downshifted to Pauper.
Yeah, so it's common printed now. Yeah,
it's stupid. It's a 5-mana 5/5 with trample, but if you have 10 or more lands, it gets +10/+10.
So fun.
It's not great in Pauper. I don't think it's quick enough, but I saw it and I was like, I think I can get somewhere with this.
Yeah.
And I just spent the time brewing with that, and I think that's my version of tinkering, where it's like I grab a bunch of trash and try and make a nice functional thing out of it.
I relate to that so much.
I guess another way you can approach deck building is by like choosing a theme. Instead of having a restriction, is like choosing a theme. So Vorthos decks are really common to do here. So like, you know, a lot of people love a particular planeswalker. So let's say Jace, for example. I'm
talking about a good friend of ours right now.
Specifically calling out a good friend of ours, Nick, who straight up just was like, I love Jace more than anything on this world. I'm going to build a Jace deck.
It's a thing to behold.
It's quite beautiful.
It's beautiful,
I actually really love it.
Yeah.
But for example, with Jace, it's a very clear-cut mechanic on Jace that Jace draws a lot of cards.
Yeah, he's like the blue mage. He's the quintessential blue mage.
Yeah.
In Color Philosophy Blue, we talked about like how each color seems to have a planeswalker that they just print into the ground across like a million different iterations.
Jace is the blue one.
Jace is the blue one, yeah.
And I think that in a Vorthos-themed deck, I imagine, and like, please, Nick, in the Discord, tell us your experience with this, but like, I imagine that building Vorthos Jace, you don't need to think about card draw as a category, because if you're only including Jace-themed cards, you're going to be drawing cards, like almost guaranteed. So your focus, I imagine, would have to be like more on the win con to like build the deck. I think because you'd probably get distracted and probably wouldn't get to a win con if you just focused on Jace stuff, because Jace would just draw cards.
Yeah, he'd like draw cards and mill.
Yeah,
probably.
That's about it. So then you need to be like, okay, now how do I win?
Yeah.
By having that as like my thing that my deck does so well.
Yeah.
Maybe a lab man, something like that.
Something like that. Yeah. So you'd have to have like a real, the theme would get you a certain amount along the road, and then you'd have to think a bit more about it. I mean, I have a Knights deck where everything...
It's incredibly Vorthos.
Yeah. So all the creatures except for Crashing Drawbridge and Sun Titan, which are Knight-ish.
Suntine's got a massive sword, and Crashing Drawbridge is a drawbridge where knights are standing above it. It counts.
Most Eldraine cards are just legal in the deck. It's like...
So you're going to get a lot of upgrades soon with the new Eldraine set.
Well, if they go back to knights again, I hope they do. But yeah, basically, it's all knights. It's all then swords. And then like a bunch of like enchantments and instants that feel like that a knight would be aware of them. Like Valorous Stance is an instant that's in the deck, because it's like, a knight would take a Valorous Stance.
I'm now struggling to remember what that card does.
It destroys a creature with power toughness 4 or greater, or it gives a creature indestructible till end of turn.
Oh, it's
like a perfectly serviceable card.
It's a removal spell and protection kind of. It fills a need, but it's also Valorous Stance is super knighty.
It's also got like one of my favorite Thrifty Thursdays cards, Stand or Fall, in there. You know, also a concept that a knight would be aware of. But in the case of building a knight's deck, like having knights just like have equipment, right? So the commander is Sir Gwyn, who cares about equipment and cares about equipping them to knights. So it's like, cool, that's just all taken care of itself. But then it was like, okay, how on earth does a knight remove something? You know, like how can I have a removal spell that is also a knight? And that was a really tough struggle for a while before I was like, oh, what if there was a knight in the art? So like, I found a really old printing of Disenchant from like
with the gauntlet thing?
the gauntlet and
So
the sword
cool,
looks super cool. But then also like swords to plowshares.
Swords.
Okay,
I get
and also it like looks like a knight. knight who's been like forced to till the fields, you know. So there's focuses you have to go down. And yeah, for me, so much of the bulk of the deck and actually the win con of the deck of just like suiting up a bunch of knights and making them big and scary takes care of itself. But then it's like, okay, I've still got to remove things, and I've still got to ramp. That was the other one that was tough.
Oh, so what did you do for ramp? You just had like...
There's some knights that do it. So Knight of the White Orchid.
Oh, that's pretty good. That
gets you a planes.
Yep.
But mostly I ended up just finding art of talismans.
Oh, that like worked really well in a knight. They just
look like a talisman that a knight would wear. So like I think I play the red white and the black white talisman, not the black red one because it looks kind of dark and goth. But the black white and the red white ones look like a talisman that you might see a knight wear around their neck. So I was like, that's close enough for me.
That's super interesting. I just think the approach to building a deck with Vorthos in mind is so like you have to really think about art. You have to think about different stuff. Like when I built my Is It deck, I built because I have a CDH Niv Mizzet Perun deck and I love it, but I get to play it very rarely. Thankfully, I've now got a pretty consistent CDH pod, which is great. But I wanted to be able to pilot Is It decks in casual.
And specifically Niv Mizzet as well.
Yes, but also Niv Mizzet Perun is just way too powerful.
Yeah.
It's too good. So it can go in the 99, but it can't be the commander. So I chose Niv Mizzet the Firemind as the commander.
It's like just basically slightly worse Niv Mizzet Perun.
It doesn't go infinite with curiosity is the main thing that Niv doesn't do.
No, it doesn't.
But I basically, when I built the deck, I was like, right, a card that is red-blue from Ravnica can go in this deck. If it's referencing Ravnica or if it's Is It feeling, it can go in the deck. For example, there are a couple of cards that I feel like aren't from the plane of Ravnica, but I think easily the card could fit in the Is It guild. For example, Stormkiln Artist. I think that even though he's from Strixhaven, that guy is within the steam vents of Ravnica, tinkering away with some explosive experiment.
For sure.
And when I was building that deck, I was like, right, okay, yes, slam all the Niv Mizzets in there. There's all my 6 drops that I will ever need. I also put the playtest Sliv Mizzet, the Sliver Niv Mizzet.
You pulled that in like a mystery booster pack. It's actually kind of pricey. Hey.
It's like $70, I think now. It's kind of wild. But like I was like, okay, but what is my win con in this deck? And I genuinely was like, I think my win con is ping damage. I think I just need to go down ping damage routes. So then I found like Geo Weird or whatever it's called, Geyser Weird or something. It's basically one blue and a red. Can't remember if I'm getting this card right, but it's also like a 0/3, but it taps and it's got like the Thermo Alchemist from Pauper. When you cast an instant or sorcery, you untap it.
And it just taps to deal 1 damage to each opponent?
Yes.
Yeah.
So it's just like, okay, well, if I have that Niv Mizzet and another Niv Mizzet and my commander Niv Mizzet, I should be pinging enough damage to close out a game. So I was like, how does this deck get to that win con? It has to draw a bunch of cards. I have to just dump a bunch of mana rocks to get the mana to cast 6 mana creatures.
Yeah.
So I've got like Firemind's Vessels because it's Niv Mizzet themed as well.
Yeah.
It was a really interesting deck to build from like a approach standpoint because my approach to it was very much like, I shouldn't worry about card draw, but I do need to worry about ramp here because my 6 mana set of creatures, all being Niv Mizzet, need to get
pretty
to those.
Essential.
Yeah.
So did you have our template in the back of your mind, or were you referring to it? Or was it really just like, I'm just thinking Is It, and then the template comes later?
I think it was like my approach to it was just thinking Is It. And then I was like, okay, do I have enough removal? Because I was like, that's something that I didn't think about in this deck at all. But then I was like, okay, hang on. I'm running a bunch of pingers.
Yeah.
That should be able to remove enough creatures.
Gotcha.
So it was like, yeah, my approach did not think about the removal number 7 at all. But because I'm running like a critical mass of pinging creatures, I was like, oh, I'm fine.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah.
So the focus... Yeah, I see what you mean. Like, the template was not essential because the focus was different.
Yeah.
The focus was not 37 lands, 10 bits of removal, 10 bits of ramp, 10 bits of removal or whatever.
It was,
you just
how do I
landed
build...
near there by focusing on Is It.
Yeah, and I think that Vorthos is such a really interesting approach that the Vorthos comes first and then the template comes second.
Yeah, for sure. So I guess maybe we're examples of that mastering the art of deck building.
Yes, because we stand on the rock at the top of the mountain in the kung fu pose.
Maybe we're not deck building masters. Maybe we're halfway up the mountain.
Nearly
we'll say.
there, yeah.
All right. So we're on a little bluff. that sits off the...
We've like set up a little camping cooker.
Yeah,
like,
and then we're doing the kung fu
Yes.
pose. And looking down at the novices down there
while a
and going,
kettle is boiling in the background.
7 bits of removal!
I know I don't have it, but I've got 4 Niv Mizzets. I guess one final thing that I want to talk about before we take a break is a deck that has a very strange win con. And the reason why this is at the top of my mind is because we played a game of Kitchen Table last night where I piloted my Ukima and Khazar deck.
Oh, these are the partner with commanders from Ikoria.
Yes.
So Ukima, let me see if I can remember. Ukima is like a 3 mana for like 1 blue-black. You get a 1/3 whale wolf.
It's a 2/2, but close.
2/2 whale wolf that is unblockable.
Just on the card.
Straight up unblockable.
Unblockable.
And when it leaves the battlefield, target opponent loses life equal to its power and you gain that much life.
Yes.
And then Kazur is a 3 and a green. It's like a 3/3 creature that says whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, put a +1 counter on it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so basically the deck is built to just put a million things on Ukima.
Yeah, suit the whale wolf up and then
it's
have it leave
unblockable.
the battlefield. So the deck wants to either win via commander damage, which is pretty easy win condition when your commander is unblockable, suit the hell out of it and swing multiple times.
Yep.
But it also plays a bunch of really weird cards that can have Ukima leave the battlefield, be sacrificed for value, and then recurred from the graveyard back to the battlefield.
I've said to you before, nobody else would build this deck like this in the best possible way.
We
it's
actually
like quintessential James.
Well, we spoke about how you would build it, and it would just be like green auras, and I'm like, nah, deadly dispute.
Yeah.
Way
No,
better.
I think Run Away Together is my win con.
Yeah, Run Away Together is such a good card in that deck.
It's fun.
It bounces a creature that 2 separate players... So, like, it bounces a creature that is controlled by 2 different players.
Yeah, I think it's return 2 target creatures that are controlled by different players.
That's
that are
how
in
it's
his hand,
worked.
or something like that. Yeah.
So I bounce Ukima to get that drain effect.
and then just
bounce the
basically
threat.
remove something else, yeah.
Like Psychosis Crawler from last
Oh,
time.
yeah, that
Super relevant
would have
play.
killed us on the stack.
Yeah, glad I did that. But I think my approach to building that deck, because that was another one of my deck building challenges where I said I can only use cards in my collection.
Yeah.
And now it's upgraded and it's been tinkered with a little bit. But my approach to building the deck was a really weird win con.
Right.
I wanted to have multiple ways of winning with either the drain effect or the commander damage thing. So I had to think about, all right, I need to choose cards that do both of these things. And by virtue of choosing cards that have Ukima leave the battlefield, like, for example, Deadly Dispute draws me cards and it's doing the thing.
Yeah.
But I only chose it because I was like, this sacrifices Ukima. And by virtue of being like, it sacrifices Ukima, oh my god, I have now card draw in my deck. Do you see what I mean? Like, it's like when you build a deck with such a strange win con, the cards that you find that support that win con often fill a need within a deck.
Right, and you're also like experienced enough of a deck builder that you just trusted that you'd have landed a number that was like appropriate.
Yeah.
By just having those in the back of your mind.
And once I got like, the 150 cards or whatever I had when I started, I made sure that when I was cutting cards that I wasn't cutting the cards that drew me cards or the cards that are also removal spells or the cards that also ramp me.
Yeah.
So like, I think, if you're building a deck with a strange win con, deck building restriction or Vorthos, you build a deck with that in mind first, and then when you cut the cards down, that's where the template comes in. It's almost like an afterthought.
Interesting. I have a question for you. I'm interested in so we talked a lot about building decks where we had a really strong focus that was not, card draw, ramp, whatever.
Sure.
When we were building them. When you're building just a regular deck where that's not necessarally a focus, so you're just brewing a
So
deck.
like I've got a commander in mind and I want to build it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you have our template like in front of you? Are you referring to it constantly, or is it kind of in the back of your mind at this point?
Like, do I have our script for that episode out?
Yeah,
ready to go?
or even I guess maybe not necessarily. I'm assuming the answer to that is no. But like, do you have the numbers like explicitly? Like, you building the deck, going, okay, I'm gonna end up with 10 bits of card draw.
I don't think I do anymore. I think I'm at the point where I'm in my deck building journey where once I've built the deck, once I have the 100 cards and I've got the 37 lands and the spells, I look at the deck after I've built it and go, right, is there anything that I need to change here? It's like the afterthought. Like I was saying before, it's like that secondary thing, right?
Yeah.
You look at the deck and go, oh man, I've focused so much on my Voltron commander that I forgot to draw any cards.
Yeah.
And I have no card draw. I should probably put like a reconnaissance or a reconnaissance mission, or even like curiosity, keen sense. So when my commander deals damage, I draw a card. Then it's a pretty easy fix. And I think this only comes when you've built at least 5 decks. I think 5 decks is when you can start going, right, then I have the experience to know what cards do a particular role in my deck. And I think 5 is like a good example because you would have tinkered with those decks, seen cards. The other thing is that you're aware of cards. Commander, again, is a huge card pool. You've literally got the largest card pool in any Magic format to choose from. Being aware of cards makes this process so much easier.
Yeah.
If I know that I'm like going to be dealing combat damage to players because my creatures, I can think about running Bident of Thassa, Reconnaissance Mission, and all of these cards. So when I do that, I'm rewarded for it with card draw. But it's like, it's not that thing of being like, I need 10 card draw spells.
Yeah, you've got a different focus in your mind. Yeah, for sure.
What about you? Where are you at?
I think I probably am similar where, for me, I think it still comes back to most decks that I build, I end up at that 150 cards mark, and then it dictates how I cut cards. Is I look at the numbers, I tag everything, and then I'm like, okay, how much do I have of everything? And it's like, okay, I've got 30 ramp spells here.
Yeah.
I know this commander has a low mana curve that it wants. I know the commander comes out super early. I need maybe like 8 bits of ramp here.
Yeah.
I'm going to just cut from this ramp section until I'm down to the 8 best bits of ramp for this deck.
Yeah.
And that's sort of how I would approach it, but I'm not setting out and going like, okay, new deck. I'm going to look for 10 card draw spells. It's like, no.
And do that first.
No.
Yeah.
I'm starting with EDH Rec, then a Scryfall, then looking through all my decks for cards that might fit, looking through my collection of cards in paper. Like, I'm starting with this huge pool of cards I'm already aware of, basically, via either websites like EDH Rec, Scryfall, or via my brain, or via the cards that I have literally physically in my room.
Or remembering cards that I've included in my decks.
Yeah.
This was something that I found when I built my Aristocrats deck with Scorpion Guard. When I was deck building, I was like, what's that black creature that Walt runs in his Marchesa deck? I need to remember. I went onto your deck list and found it. This is like, I genuinely think that if you start out with our template, it is a great place to start. I'm not saying that if you're a brand new player, we said it before, it's a great template for brand new players.
Definitely.
But I think if you're starting out, go through, fill out those 10 card draw requirements for your first 2 decks that you build.
Yeah.
Third deck, leave the template to the last step.
Yeah.
Leave it out, and then once you build your third deck, really go and just like gas in and be like, these are the themes that I want to build. This is what my thing that my deck is doing is. Then once I've built it, I'll check with the Get Commanded template, see if it works, and then I can edit.
Yeah.
I think that's pretty good place to have a break.
I think
as well.
so too.
We've been talking for a while.
We have indeed. So we have lots left to cover, obviously, including some different approaches to deck building that we've identified from people around us. But we are going to take a thrifty interlude. So we're going to hear a little something about a thrifty card. And as is tradition, I will be performing a monologue. This week, the card is brought to life in monologue form from the perspective of someone in the card. So, James, would you like to read the card we'll be featuring this week?
I'm looking forward to hearing your bird voice. Because it's Gust Cloak Savior. I can't read. Gust Cloak Savior, 4 and a white for a creature, bird, soldier, and it's a 3/4 with flying that also reads, whenever a creature you control becomes blocked, you may untap that creature and remove it from combat.
And they're looking around thinking, wow, we've done it. We've defeated Tsar and Markov, and then swoop! There I am! Not today, numpty! I'm lightning fast, dodging arrows, swords, axes, birds, and tentacles. You name it, it can't touch me. Before you can blink, the biggest VIP on that battlefield, out of there, extracted. Most famous hero I've saved? Great question. Well, I got Ulamog out of a bar fight once. Avacyn nearly got decapitated by Garrick one time, but not on my watch. No, if I were being serious, I'd have to say myself. Get budgeted!
All right, that's not the bird soldier that I was expecting. He's from Brooklyn?
I don't know. He's Al Pacino, but he's flies and he's a cunt.
Also, weird card.
Yeah.
It, like, untaps all your creatures if they... So it's like kind of bluffing combat tricks, I
Yeah,
guess?
so I actually originally had this card because I had an Onslaught block pre-constructed deck, like 60 cards.
Was this one of the ones in the elastic band with no sleeves? Yeah.
Oh no, well, a lot of the cards, we just our decks that we played with at the time were just like every white card we owned and then enough planes. Which is why Commander was so seamless for me. It was like shuffling 100 cards, easy. I normally shuffle like 150.
That's what Commander is.
Yeah. Anyway, you can check these out as they're released every Thursday on our Discord server in the Thrifty Thursdays channel. They're released as little text posts over there. And you can see us bring some of these to life in video form over on TikTok at Get Commanded. So follow us on there to see those as they come out.
Yeah, and more highlights of this podcast. It's just talking to our incredible video editor.
Great.
There's some more on the horizon, so definitely a good time to follow.
Lots to look forward to. Yeah.
All right, back to how we approach deck building in its entirety. Now, I was talking to one of the Space Commanders, Fletcher.
Yes.
Yeah, the one that I know where I can find. He's at the game store.
Yes.
The rest of the Space Commanders
anywhere.
I'm assuming like behind Jupiter, like their spaceship's like hovering behind Jupiter.
It's that wormhole like in Interstellar.
Yeah, exactly right. But when I was talking to Fletcher the other day, we were talking about we were talking PDH specifically, but also the PDH podcast.
Yeah.
The PDH pod, which we mentioned on this podcast before. We talked about them on the PDH episode. But huge shout out to these guys because they have a really interesting series that they run called 3x3.
Interesting.
And I think it's worth talking about when we're talking about this command, about approaching deck building. Because
and alternative methods, right? That's what the Space Commanders wanted. So this is like an alternative method for approaching deck building?
Exactly right.
Okay.
So I'm calling it the pillar method. The series on their podcast is called 3x3. I've linked their podcast Spotify link in the show notes, so go check them out. They're incredible.
Yeah.
But essentially what it is, they've got 3 hosts.
Okay.
And they call it 3x3 because they're 3 minds building one archetype and they'll get 3 different decks out of it.
Oh.
So it's how each of them approach the deck building differently. But the main premise of the episode is when they're building an archetype, they identify 4 pillars that archetype stands on.
Okay.
So then, once they've got those 4 pillars, they go away and they build a deck with those 4 pillars in mind. So their approach is those 4 pillars rather than the template that we use, for example.
Okay, interesting. I've not heard of building a deck like this before.
No, neither had I. But after I listened to 2 episodes, I went way back in their history. So sorry, PDH Pod, if your early episodes were like ours, stuff that you're like, yeah, go listen to them, but listen to what we're doing now because it's much better. But I listened to their Voltron episode and their Go Wide episode.
Okay.
Because I thought they were pretty 2 different things. And I was like, I want to see how they approach different strategies and pretty well.
Classic Commander archetypes, right?
Yeah.
Like most of us who've built more than 5 or 6 decks will have built both of these types before.
Yeah, I think everyone has to have at least one Voltron in their Commander experience.
Yeah, it's likely. Maybe they don't have it anymore. Like I've disassembled, I think, all of mine now. But yeah, most of us have built one at least.
Yeah, Ukima is like the closest one I got.
Yeah, for sure.
But it's not Voltron. It's weird.
Okay, so with a Voltron deck, they're gonna have 4 pillars that they're going to focus all their deck building attention on.
Yeah.
And then the 3 of them then approach how they do the pillars a bit differently. But they agree on the pillars, the 4 of them?
So together they agree on the pillars and then they build, and then on the episode of the podcast, they each go, here's my commander and here's my deck. Here's how my deck fills these 4 pillars.
Ah, so it's a really strong focus. This is like completely supplementing, or not supplanting is the word I'm looking for, the template that they're using, because they're just straight up going like, nope, no template. These are the 4 pillars. The whole deck comes from these 4 pillars.
And the very approach in which I choose my cards, I cut my cards, or I edit my deck in any capacity is with these 4 pillars in mind.
Cool.
They're not thinking about how much card draw they're running. They're not thinking about, I have to run X ramp spells or X removal spells. So, for example, the Voltron episode, they agreed that the 4 key pillars on the Voltron archetype is number 1, and I love the word they use here. They use embiggening as a word to describe making the commander swole.
Has a card now.
Embiggen, yes, that's
yeah.
so true. So embiggening, like this is also with power and toughness, but also with keywords. So if you can put keywords,
this makes sense. This is probably the pillar of Voltron.
it's
arguably.
like the one thing that you want your Voltron. If your Voltron deck isn't doing this, you're not building a Voltron deck.
No, you're doing something else.
You're building a commander deck that wants to swing.
Yeah.
Like, sure.
Combat. We'd all do that.
Yeah, the second pillar is what they dubbed protecting the baby, which I kind of like how they said, I immediately thought of The Mandalorian, protect the baby.
Yeah.
Yep.
I respect that.
Yep, so protecting...
Also makes a lot of sense, right? Like we're putting all of our eggs in that single basket that is that commander who is a basket case. So we should protect them and make sure we're not investing all that mana and resources into something that's going to get removed.
I will also highlight, obviously, because they're PDH, they were building PDH commanders. One of the hosts built Yargle, the black mono
Amazing.
Black. It's so cool.
The 8-3 or 6-3?
7-3.
7-3.
No words, just flavor text on the card.
He's a 5 mana 7-3.
4 and a black, I think. Yeah. So that was one of the commanders.
That's fun.
I just wanted to shout that out because I thought it was great.
I love that.
Now the third pillar is how not to run out of gas, because in Voltron you're going to dump a bunch of equipment or buff and then you need to refill your hand some way.
Yep.
The fourth pillar is how to not die. So when you're building Voltron, specifically if you've only got one creature, you've not got many blocks, you're probably going to get swung out by more creatures than you have the ability to block. So that's where that fourth pillar comes in.
We see a lot of Voltron decks playing spells like Propaganda even, and that kind of thing that basically just disincentivize combat coming your way. Or, I know when I have built Voltron decks, I often will include auras that make bodies. So they're like a way of buffing the commander, like a card like Pollen Bright Wings. It's a 6 mana aura. It gives the creature flying and +3/+3, I think, and says whenever it deals combat damage, create that many saprolings.
That's sick.
So
I like that.
Really, really good way of like having a payoff. Like you might just win with those saprolings, but also, in combat, they're going to block really well.
Or like in my Voltron strategy, I just love having the ability to say, I can make Ukima leave the battlefield right now if you swing at me.
That's your how to not die, right?
Yeah.
Like all of those effects that you have that are like
gain a
instant
bunch of
speed,
life.
like removal, like bouncing Ukima or destroying, sacrificing Ukima, that kind of thing. All of that is your how to not die, right? Because you're just going to gain like 8 life, 9 life.
Yeah, keeping my life total high on Ukima is definitely one of them, but I was more going down the political route of like, don't swing at me, I'll drain you for 9.
That's so James of you.
Yes, very James of me. So they're the 4 pillars of the Voltron strategy, right?
That makes a lot of sense.
So they did another episode which I listened to called the Go Wide 3x3, and in that, the 4 pillars, pillar number 1, how to amass an army.
That makes sense. That's going wide.
You're going wide. You need to be able to go wide.
You need to have an army.
Yes. Not the actual amass mechanic, because that makes one big thing. I realized that the word amass there is actually quite confusing.
The one thing I don't like about army, the army and amass mechanic,
it doesn't feel like a lot of creatures.
I appreciate that the tokens make it seem like it is. It's like, okay, this is an army of zombies because I can see it in the tokens. But as an actual battlefield, amassing an army is just like having one big singular creature.
Yeah.
Anyway, just that's nitpicking. But yes, so amassing an army.
As a side tangent, have you seen there are amassing slivers now? You can make a sliver army. Yeah, in the new precon for
the
Commander
slivers,
Masters.
Whatever it is, like rainbow slivers or something it's called.
Yeah, it's amass slivers. So now we have a mass zombie, a mass orc, and a mass slivers.
I will strongly argue that a mass slivers is going to be the most busted version of the mechanic.
Yeah. Number 1, how to amass an army.
It makes sense.
Second pillar is how to embiggen your army. I love that word again. They really like this word on this podcast.
They
as
do.
Well.
This makes a lot of sense. Like you need to have those overrun, overwhelming stampede style effects,
or even Glorious Anthem, for example.
Oh yeah,
giving
just
all of your creatures
static buffs, make them bigger. Yeah, for sure.
And the third pillar, how to not run out of gas.
Okay, I'm seeing a recurring theme here. That was also in the last one.
Fourth pillar, how to not die.
Also in the last one.
Makes
sense.
Obviously, I think those 2 last pillars are repeats, and I've not listened to all of their episodes. I think they've got 5, 6, 7 episodes on this series now, which I'm keen to go back into. I'm also wanting to build my first PDH deck after we did our PDH episode. So I want to listen to these guys a little bit more.
Yeah. I like that as a focus, though. That's super interesting, this pillars thing. I guess... And
I will note as well, Fletcher did highlight to me that they did a more Vorthosy themed approach
Oh.
with this pillar strategy. They built a Halloween themed deck,
That's fun.
which I think ended up just being like a graveyard reanimator strategy.
Oh, that's totally respectable.
I haven't listened to it yet, but I think it's probably the next one on my list. But
Yeah.
I love the fact that they can approach deck building with a synergy focus first,
Yeah.
and then should we talk do pros and cons?
Okay,
because I've
sure.
got opinions.
Yeah, sure. So I think pros definitely, they have inbuilt something that our template doesn't have, which is synergy, right?
Yes, well,
it's so
focus.
Yeah, it's so interesting because I guess for us, that's assumed, right? It's okay, we know you're building a deck that is a dragons deck, so we know you're going to put dragons in your deck. What will you need for the dragons deck to work? It's sort of that's how I would lay out the reasoning behind our template, right?
Yes.
It's we know you're going to put dragons in there. We're not worried about that bit. Let's make sure you get this thing right, the card draw and everything.
Yeah.
But I think the one thing that can happen with our template that this thing kind of remedies is that you can, and I've seen people do this before, they've built using our template, but the pieces they choose for card draw, for removal, for ramp, are not synergistic.
Yeah.
They've just put in, they're playing a dragons deck,
And
and
then
then
they put
their
in-
removal is Swords to Plowshares. And it's okay, fair enough, but you have Dragon Tempest, right?
Yeah, or for example, they have played a big mana spells deck and they see Pull from Tomorrow as a great card draw spell, but in their Dragons deck that's 5 color, Pull from Tomorrow is kind of bad because you're
Yeah.
only generating probably 7-8 mana in a game
Yeah.
on a turn. That's used to cast your dragons,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think that focusing your streamlined, I want to do this with my deck, what we refer to as the thing, basically means that every card you pick fills that need.
Yeah.
Always fills that need. And I think that when we're talking about cards like Artifact Mutation earlier this episode, we love when we find cards like that. That's a bonus for us, but sits outside of our template. But this is
Yeah.
embedded in the template.
Yeah.
In their pillars structure, right?
Yeah, totally. I think it's the kind of thing where when we outline our template, we mention all of these things, but when you condense it down to the bit that people look at, that page of the PowerPoint or whatever,
Yeah.
just says the numbers on it.
10 plus card draw.
Yeah,
or
so
whatever,
if that was the only thing people were taking away from our template, they would miss synergy. Whereas in this case, with these guys, I see that the pillars means that at the bare minimum, they build a synergistic deck, right?
Yes.
They can't not because it's built into the template, you know?
Yeah, well, I was talking again to Fletcher about how he's done this, especially with PDH. He's got I believe it's called Abdul, the white flicker.
Abdel Adrian, I think his name is.
Yeah, wild deck, firstly.
Yeah.
This deck hangs at regular commander pods, and it's a PDH deck.
Yeah.
It's insanity.
It's so cool. I think he plays it with a background, but I forget what background he plays it with.
I think it's whenever it attacks, it flickers something,
Yeah,
or something like
and then
that.
Abdel Adrian says when he enters the battlefield, you can exile any number of non-land permanents you control under him.
Yeah.
And then when he leaves the battlefield, you return them all.
everything. So
So
it's
you basically tuck a bunch of things with enter the battlefield effects under Abdel Adrian when you ETB. So you make a million little things that draw cards when they ETB or remove things when they ETB. Cast Abdel Adrian, tuck them all underneath him, and then you just spend the rest of the game flickering him, basically. Because
and
you just, every time you're
recurring
flickering
value.
him, yeah, you're getting so much value from the ETB.
I think that is a clear example of a deck that took I'm going all in on this strategy.
Yeah.
The ETB, when things ETB, they do something, and I have to have ways of making them ETB over and over again. The deck will work as long as I fill those needs.
Yeah.
There's all right, I know my pillars, I'm going all in, and that deck works. It's great.
It does. And I've spoken to Fletcher before about his deck building strategy, and he said before that he feels this is one thing. Well, it's interesting. We'll go into it in the cons in a second, but Fletcher feels that he builds decks that have a singular goal, and all the cards move towards that goal.
Yeah.
And yeah, there's pros and cons to that, but the pros is that in terms of synergy, everything is a synergy piece.
Yeah.
You never draw a card and go oh man, this is a great removal spell, but I wish it did something with Abdel Adrian. It's no, everything does something with Abdel Adrian.
Yeah, it's really cool. I think that, we'll talk about it when we get to cons, but I want to give another pro here that this pillar approach makes you do when you build a deck. I think I've not built with this approach in mind, but I would argue that this approach makes you understand your deck way better than our template would in terms of describing a Rule Zero conversation.
Oh.
I think that our template, and we've talked about Rule Zero a lot on this podcast, we think that it's a really, really important part of, you know, the Rule Zero discussion and making sure that everyone's having fun. We think it's imperative to Commander.
Yeah.
But I think our template doesn't actually help you with that conversation.
No.
But this does. If you just answer those like 4 pillars questions, that's what our Rule Zero template is.
It's really close.
It's pretty much bang on.
So our 3 questions that we normally ask for Rule Zero is, how does your deck win?
Yeah.
How efficiently does it do it?
And why.
Yeah.
Like, so show us some cards that make it more efficient.
Yeah. And how does it stop me from winning? But these 4 pillars basically answer all those things, right?
Yeah.
Like if we go through the go wide thing, right? If I'm talking to you about my Reese the Redeemed deck,
Which
right?
is a go wide strategy.
Yep. I would be telling you, okay, my goal is to make 1 million tokens.
Yep.
And then I'm going to cast an overrun effect. So there we go. That's how to amass an army, how to embiggen your army. That's the first 2 pillars right there. I'm going to be drawing a bunch of cards with ETB effects to refill my hand. I've got 1 or 2 tutors in the whole deck so that I find the right cards. And I've got a couple of ways to gain life and a bunch of removal spells that I can recur because I can flicker them again.
And that's the 3rd and 4th pillar. How to not run out of gas, how to not die.
Yeah.
There's your Rule Zero.
Yeah, that's super interesting. I didn't think about it that way, but that's true. Like, it's kind of baked into the pie, right?
Yes.
Like, you have to be thinking about your Rule Zero conversation because you're thinking about how you win and how you stop your opponents from winning.
And what your deck is built on. And I genuinely think that a huge win of this approach in deck building is that you'll know your deck better than just being like, I have 10 card draw spells in here. What they are and what they do, I don't know.
Yeah.
But like in this template, it's like, no, my deck is doing ETB stuff. And I'm drawing cards from these ETBs, and I can describe how my commander flickering those over and over again is making them better, and really describes a Rule Zero conversation a lot better than our template, personally.
There's definitely an appeal to the simplicity here, right? Like, by stripping it all down to its bare necessities, right, of what deck building actually is, which is building a synergistic deck, right? Like, that's
a deck that does the thing.
Yeah, and making it like literally there are 4 things that you should be thinking about, has a big appeal, especially for new players, I would say, where, you know, it's easy to get bogged down in our numbers, I would say, but like 4 focuses, anybody can have that in their mind.
And it can also probably feel like, you know, when we have like a list of numbers, it feels more like a checklist and a chore than brewing, and, you know,
That's true.
It feels more academic.
There's more room for creativity here, maybe.
All right. I want to go into cons.
Yeah.
Because I think that, firstly, PDH Pod, if you're listening, what's up? But you guys have done a great job here with this series. I think that, all the pros stand way, way above. But I do want to highlight, in terms of an approach to deck building, I think there are a couple of things that this approach might lead someone astray on, or might fall on its face a little bit. And the first one is that this approach is very much a feel it out kind of way of deck building. And I think it requires a lot of play testing and requires a lot of tinkering.
Yeah.
I think that if you build a deck with this approach, I think you'll find that you'll play it once and then go, oh no, I'm way too heavily invested in this pillar, or I need more of this pillar.
I think funnily enough, you'll need the numbers at some point, right? Like, you'll end up in the numbers anyway, because, like, the thing that I don't love about it is that because there's these 4 pillars, it implies to me that there's a balance of these 4 pillars.
It's almost like a quarter of your deck should be this, a quarter of your deck should be that.
That's just implied to me in it by having 4 columns, you know, like 4 pillars. But like, if we go back to that go wide strategy again, we've talked before, like if we go back to our numbers, we would not be playing a quarter of the deck as making the army and a quarter of the deck as embiggening the army. We would be going, okay, like building the army is the thing that our deck is doing.
Number 1, big, it needs to happen before you can embiggen.
So there probably should be 25, 30 spells that are going to do that, but the embiggening of the army should be like 5, maybe 6 cards,
At
right?
most.
Like overrun sort of effects, maybe a couple of anthems, that kind of thing. That's it. But that's not really clear from the pillars
Yeah,
here.
but if you just went on the pillars, you could be like, all right, I'm going to run 10 cards that build me an army and 10 cards that buff an army.
Yeah.
Sometimes, and most of the time, I reckon, if you went with that approach, in a game, you'll be like, all right, I've made 3 tokens and they're 3 3s.
Yeah.
Cool, you've got 3 beasts. Well done.
Yeah.
Like, it's not going to win the game. But if you have 10 tokens and now they're 3 3s, you've got 30 damage on board.
Yeah.
That's way better. And if you make sure that your deck is balanced in that way with the template in mind, I think that that's where our template helps this process and this approach become better.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
I think the other thing I noticed, I mean, we pointed out as we were doing it, but the last 2 pillars were the same across those 2 things.
Pretty much always.
And those 2 last pillars represented a good chunk of where our numbers come from. So it's interesting that they have this, like, you always need to be thinking about this thing, is kind of implied in their template, but they're not telling you how much. Whereas I would say, like, our template sort of breaks those categories down a bit and has, is a bit more complex in that way, but tells you, how to not die is going to be about protecting your game plan, protecting your life total.
Yeah.
And this is how many of those cards we think you should have, right?
But it could also be removal. Protection, their protection strategy of like how to not die could also be like, all right, I also need to run removal spells because my opponent's creatures will kill me. So killing them will make me not die. And I think that if you overcompensate in one area, you'll be like lacking in the other.
Well, this doesn't tell you, like, not dying can involve board wiping.
Yes.
But if you're playing a go wide deck and you're playing 6 board wipes, you're setting yourself back so much just by virtue of how much of the time you're going to want to draw more cards that make tokens or make your things bigger. And instead you're drawing a board wipe and going, hold on, I've got 10 creatures. I don't want a board wipe.
Yeah, I think that there's like, I do want to highlight that the PDH pod has never said that this is their quote template to building a deck.
Okay.
They've talked about it in the context of their series that they run on their podcast, and it's their approach of how they build the deck.
Yeah.
So I think they still probably, to some extent, have a template in their head that they use.
Yeah.
But I think the important thing to highlight here is their approach is very different, and I think there is huge benefits that we've outlined to their approach. And there might be a little bit of cons, but it's a different approach. And that's what the Space Commanders wanted to know.
Yeah, and I do see definitely the appeal of that approach, right? Like we were saying, having only a few things in your mind as your like primary focus does really eliminate a lot of the distractions and make sure that, at a minimum, you're building a synergistic deck.
Well, we've talked about a bunch of times that, like, getting distracted by sub-themes is a big problem in deck building.
It's true.
This solves that.
That's true.
Yeah.
I agree.
All right, well, building a commander deck is not a simple process, even if the IKEA instruction graphics make it seem simple. There are so many content creators that are telling you to run minimum this many of this type of card and don't run more than 5 of this type of card. And look, Walt and I are a part of that. We don't claim that our template is the be-all and end-all, but we do think, after many, many decks built between us, that this is a great starting point. And it is a huge challenge to build a commander deck. So don't be afraid to approach your deck building in a different way. Give yourself a challenge. It can be incredibly rewarding, and thinking about what the thing is allows for greater understanding of your own deck, leading to better rule zeros and potentially better piloting. So, Space Commanders, command received. Interesting episode.
Yeah.
Something that's really forced us to think differently about deck building. We've done a lot of deck building episodes, but never anything like this before.
No, it's true. It does feel really different. So to you listeners out there, do you feel commanded? What do you think of our deck building templates or deck building templates in general? And I want to know what your focus is when you build a commander deck. Do you have our template in the back of your mind? Are you using the pillars? What's your bread and butter of building a deck?
Or do you just go into that pile of chaff and go, something will work? And look, you can tell us in plenty of different ways. You can send us an email, but the best place to talk to Walt and I directly and other members of our play group is on our Discord server. You can find that in the show notes. So go jump in there and talk to us directly.
Yep. And don't forget to follow us on on Twitter to see our thoughts on upcoming cards, sets, events, and just other general Magic the Gathering things. You can check us out at Get Commanded.
Or follow us on X now,
Oh,
apparently.
yeah, supposedly.
We won't talk about that.
And also, don't forget to check out our Patreon page. As we said, this episode is brought to you from the mind of our patron who supports us in the Space Commander, Fletcher Cutting. So very big thank you to Fletcher who supports us in that tier.
You are the best.
You are the best, Fletcher. And we would like to thank our other patrons, Stella Tam and Fuzzy.
Thanks for joining us.
Yeah.
And also, as always, big shout out and a special thank you to Palms Off Gaming for sponsoring this podcast. We're really excited that our guest appearance on their podcast will be released relatively soon. We're not too sure, but
they record very far in advance, is what we
yeah.
learned. So it might be a few weeks away for all of you when you listen, but
it's exciting.
It's on the horizon.
Yeah, and also more things to come from Palms Off. We're working with them closely.
Definitely.
These guys are really, really amazing Australian-based card lovers, which is awesome.
Yeah, yep. You can check them out at palmsoffgaming.com.au.
All right, it's tradition. We've been talking for about an hour. Let's planeswalk outside of Magic to somewhere else. And Walt, it is your turn this week. What have you been up to?
Well, I'd like to planeswalk into my other passion besides Magic the Gathering, which is the realm of theatre, and specifically my show just went on sale.
I'm so excited.
Yeah, so James is already aware of this, but I'm going to be performing in a show called Two Tame Rhinos as part of Melbourne Fringe Festival here in Melbourne in October.
By the way, the links to tickets are in the show notes.
Yes,
go buy tickets. Come see Walt, and I'll be in the audience as well.
So basically, it's a 40-minute improvised performance by me and my friend Charla Muhammad. And it'll be responding to the themes and characters of this really fantastic old play called Rhinoceros by Eugene Ionesco.
Should I read the play?
Don't need to. Absolutely don't need
Okay.
to. It's more like a kind of it's just a stimulus for us. We're using that as our starting point, but it's not a retelling of the story. It's not necessarily referring to the story.
Yeah.
It's like a reimagining, like sort of in the same mind that someone might think of Rhinoceros.
Do you think I'd get more out of it if I read the Rhinoceros?
Maybe. I'm not sure, to be honest. I don't think you need to. Would be the gist, I would say.
Because when is it? When are you putting this?
It's in October, as part of Melbourne Fringe Festival. So I think it's you're testing me now. It's the Thursday, Friday, Saturday of the second and third week. So I think it's like 9, 10, 11.
Yeah.
And then whatever the following Thursday, Friday, Saturday is of the next week. But it's only 40 minutes long.
Yep.
Tickets are only $20, which is not too bad.
You're also supporting Australian theatre, and Melbourne needs that support.
It's true. And there's only a limited number of tickets. So I'm performing in a really small venue that's run by a friend of mine called Red Velvet Underground. It's only got a capacity of 22 people, and there's only 6 shows. So that's only like 130 tickets across the whole season. I know a few people. There's a few of you out there as well. So to make sure you don't miss out, I would highly recommend getting some tickets as soon as you can.
I'm literally purchasing my tickets after we record this, but I'll put a note of what date I'm going. So if you want to sit in the audience with me, we can sort that out. A Get Commanded support crew for Walt on stage. It's awesome.
It'll be a good time. It is a small venue, so like go in aware of the fact that you will be most likely only a few meters away from me and Charla. So certainly if you're someone who's a little bit like iffy about that, just be aware of it.
No audience interaction though, right? You're not. Can't promise anything.
It's improvised, man.
Okay.
Anything could happen. But
do it to me. I'm okay with that. If I'm in the front row, just do it to me, okay?
No, look, most likely the extent of the audience interaction will be looking directly into your eyeballs. So if that freaks you out, maybe not. But for most of you, you should be fine.
I'm so excited, and also incredibly proud of you. I think your passion for theatre has really shone this year with all the work that you did up in Wurundjeri Country, all the work you're doing back here in Melbourne, and also the weird interludes that you do every week on this podcast.
That's true. If you want to see more of me being a weirdo, that is like a guarantee. So it's called Two Tame Rhinos. We'll link it in the show notes. I'd love if you could buy some tickets and support some other content that I'm making.
It's so exciting, man.
Yeah, I'm thrilled. I'm actually just so stoked.
Your smile is like wider than your face is right now. It's
going to be great. It's going to be awesome.
Awesome. Well, I think that's all we have time for, so we'll see you next Friday from another transmission from the Space Commanders. Goodbye, Commander players.